So here's what's up with this divine feminine, divine masculine stuff. Neither of these two things is better qualitatively than the other. The divine feminine and the divine masculine is a way of talking about two different types of energy. An original duality, which means that it's an original way that you can split up and describe every single thing in the universe. You can describe it in terms of the energies of the divine masculine and the divine feminine. So this is a concept that corresponds to electromagnetism and physics, and then it also corresponds to, since electromagnetism and physics have everything to do with how our bodies are made up and how our cells communicate, it also has the energies of the divine masculine and the divine feminine also have everything to do with playing into the social presentations of how our bodies and our brains relate to the physics of how our chemistry is made up. So the divine feminine, this is one of those concepts that's both really, really simple and then also really complicated. And I feel like it's going to be hard to describe, but maybe I'm just saying that and I'm going to then make it hard to describe. But so the divine feminine, I've been thinking about it. So the divine feminine, though, it's the energy of receiving. It's receiving, and and then the divine masculine is the stimulation. So you have the charged, so originally in the universe, you have a charged particle. Actually, originally you just have a charge. But in this case, we're going to talk about particles because it's easier to understand, or maybe like conceptualize particles and like an object. So you have a charge, like the divine masculine is the charge. So you have the stimulus over here, and then you have the divine feminine, which is the receptor for that energetic stimulus. So any stimulus or any charge has a frequency, and a receptor has to be tuned in a certain way in order to be able to recognize different bands of frequencies. So if you think about like your radio is only manufactured to be able to recognize certain bands of frequencies. And then if the frequency rises in the energy, then the bandwidth goes up. And I might not be saying that right, but the radio station, at least in the frequency, goes up. So, and likewise, it's the same energy that eventually can turn into, if you raise it high enough, it's light. It can correspond to light and color energy, and if you take it low enough, it can become solid matter. So solid matter is just really, really low frequency energy, just like ice is really, really, really slow water. It's slow that it becomes crystallized. It's solids. So the divine feminine is all about the force, the energy. It's not a force, but the energy of receiving, which is also intertwined with the energy of recognition, of identification, the energy of perception. And the masculine is the thing that is going to be perceived. Remember, I'm saying masculine and feminine, and that sounds like I'm talking about men and women. We sort of are between the lines, but we're not really. It's really about energy, and it's not it shouldn't be a gendered concept, and to make it into a gendered concept is to really pervert the meaning of what it's about. But once you really understand, I think it's important, and I stand to be, I don't know, if there's better words, then I would love to know those, but I think it's actually, once you really understand what we are talking about, it makes so much sense that you would use those words, masculine and feminine. It makes so much sense that we do gender objects, and that you can like sort of, that it's not that we do, but like that it almost seems like we are gendering like objects and different forces, when in reality we're sort of using those terms in like this magnetism and electricity kind of way. Stimulus reaction. The feminine, the divine feminine, if there is something to be received, then the divine feminine is the receiver of the thing to be received. So in society, we have this element where you can apply this to groups of people and just humans at large. And there is this, over millennia, just the way that evolution happens, evolutionarily, the evolution of our planet and consciousness on our planet, the divine feminine, the energy of receiving, becomes the side of the duality of consciousness that has been abused in a more systemic way. So what this means is that over time it has become such that there is more stuff in the world that needs to be processed from a consciousness perspective by humans than there are, let me think how to say it. There's just a lot of stuff in the world that needs to be processed, a lot of stimuli, a lot of charged material, static energy that needs to be processed and or received. And for a long time, the divine feminine has been overburdened with processing everybody else's stuff, or processing the stuff of the divine masculine. So this goes, you can think of that. So this is one of those things, like everything, as above, so below. So from a planetary perspective, the planet, the energy of Gaia, is the divine feminine, and it's the receiver of the charged material that's put out there. So from a planetary perspective and from a global consciousness perspective, the divine feminine has been, that's where the planet, you can actually see like the impact of this from a planetary perspective of like the extinctions and things like that that humans have essentially caused because of seeming neglect completely. Because it's like we have all the information about how to not do this stuff, and we have all the information about the value of for example, polar bears, yet people can still go out and take videos of polar bears who are dying, or name your issue about the planet. It's like we have the consciousness to know what we're doing is wrong, but there's so much like static energy out there that the receptor of the divine feminine of the planet has been tuning into static for a really long time, trying to get it right, because there's just too much noise. And so the noise is the stress that humans cause, the damage that they cause to the planet, the damage that humans cause to each other in the course of their relationships, the pain, neglect, humanistic injustices, genocides, abuses within the culture, practices that abuse the species, such as circumcision, unconscious ways of living, being out of touch with the planet. The planet needs humans. It's not just that we need, as individuals, need to reconnect with the planet. The planet needs humans to reconnect with it, because we literally energetically process the consciousness of the planet for it. And when we are not in touch with the earth, and when we're not in touch with a more holistic sense of society and the community at large, that's when the divine feminine has become completely overburdened and gets lost. That's where you see, so the divine feminine are the vulnerable, the marginalized, anybody who's been placed on their back foot in society, such that you are always in a catching stance. And if you are always in a catching stance and always have your head on the swivel looking for somebody else's energy to receive or process so that you don't get hurt by somebody else throwing their shit at you, you eventually get, your back really hurts. If you're standing like this all the time, you can't do it. You can't support. Nobody can support being exclusively in a stance of the divine feminine, because you just become more and more like ossified to the planet, rather than being in flow with the planet, rather than taking other people's helping other people to process their energy and letting it flow through you. The divine feminine, so the marginalized, the vulnerable, the people who identify as the divine feminine, you're probably a divine feminine if that term resonates with you. And there are many men for whom that term should be more accessible, but it's not, just because it's maybe misappropriated and would be seen as like something to do with gender and sexuality. It's not. It's just about who's more of the receiver, like more of the counselor, more of the processor in relationships. Who are the processors in society? What species in our ecosphere process? And so, as above, so below. At every level, there are processors. At every level, there is a divine feminine. And for millennia, at every level, the divine feminine has been receiving more and more backlog of static energy that the divine feminine is incapable of processing, because it's no longer supported, no longer has the divine masculine, the internal divine masculine, which is the structure, or which contributes to creating the structure and the balance the divine masculine does. And the more you're in divine feminine, the less you're able to be somebody who's like, the more you play defense, the less you're gonna be like a super good offense player. And that's not even true. But for the purposes of this analogy, that's what's happened when you're abused and when you are placed in a posture of defense for an extended period of time, or when this happens to groups over millennia, or when this happens to systems in organizations, when this happens to you at work, when it happens to you everywhere. That's the divine, just everywhere, as above, so below. When the vulnerable is receiving the brunt of the crappy stuff that's out there, and the vulnerable doesn't also have somebody to pass it off to, that's when there's a collapse imminent. There's a house of cards situation. And we've had this house of cards situation with the divine feminine and divine masculine, and how those energies interact. And we've had ancient seers have known about this building imbalance, building imbalance, whatever, and have been telling of it for forever. And that's what all the predictions about, the apocalypse and things like that, it's all about just the vulnerable parts of society being overburdened with everybody else's crap for way too long. And so much so that the vulnerable parts don't even often have the agency or the access or the capacity, like, of a well-functioning neurological system to be able to process, or to be able to process any of this stuff, or to be able to have the support that they actually need, or to even recognize that what people are experiencing in terms of their inability to manifest success in their life, and the inability to access satisfaction or even just contentment, a state of peace. Most people can't access that in the West, and it's because the divine feminine is instrumental in helping people to access those things. And we've cut everybody off from the forces and the wisdom of the divine feminine, and what is offered by those in society who do open themselves up to other people's energy and help process things on behalf of others, and give more of themselves than they take. That's the divine feminine too. It can be. A healthy divine feminine has an energetic balance whereby you actually have a cup of energy that's overflowing, so much so that when you are receiving, you are actually also counterintuitively generating your own energy. But if the divine feminine is abused, and if the cup is not at a point of abundance and overflow, then the cup will be inching towards the dregs. And whereas it's like an exponential overflow if the divine feminine is well, and in the divine feminine energy, that's an exponential overflow of energy that's coming back in. You're putting out, you're getting much more in than you are out. But if your cup isn't all the way full, then the exponential factor goes in the opposite direction, and you are just heading towards burnout quick. And we've been as humanity, as the planet, I'm saying planet, I really want to talk about the universe, but we'll just talk about it in planetary terms, because that's maybe easier to think about right now. It's hard enough to get past the words of divine feminine and masculine, because I am a person who really cares about language and the meaning of words, and what are the subconscious, the subliminal meanings behind things, and the cultural embedded messages in words. And so it's important to me that we get to a place of, or that it's important to me at least that I try to establish an understanding, or teach this and make it make sense as to why I'm still using those terms, in spite of the fact that I think that it's it's pretty confusing around a topic that's extremely important, maybe the most important topic that there is, and then we're using confusing terms. But if you could just hang in there to understand why we're using confusing terms, that really informs the whole rest of why it's all interesting to begin with, and why how this actually really fundamentally affects your life, my life, and yeah, the multiverse. So I'm Alice Anahata, the witch in the Glen. Thanks.